You know you're buttoning the thing inside.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Hello, everybody. I guess as people join on.
How you doing, Brando?
Good, how
How
you
you doing,
doing?
Brian?
Good. How are you, David?
Doing okay. I'm doing well.
So we are recording this meeting, and we will have it available on YouTube afterwards. So we'll put a link on our website, or we'll do it an easy way that you all can be able to find it. And just for a little background, this meeting is regarding the Cadman Asphalt plant, more specifically the draft notice of construction permit that the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency is processing for the activities that have gone on at the Cadman plant. As most of you know, the draft notice of construction permit can get pretty technically savvy. And so we don't have the staff capacity on staff to really understand all the technical aspects of the permit. So we hired experts to help us navigate through the permitting process with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And I'll introduce those experts to you in a minute. The real purpose of this meeting today is for the community to talk to the experts and understand specifically what the draft notice of construction permit includes, and be able to help and answer any questions and talk to the experts and see if there's anything else that we should be asking for in the notice of construction. So we're going to, I'll do introductions to our experts, and then there'll be a presentation by the experts. And then following that, there'll be additional questions and answer. And so some of you have already submitted some questions and answers, and those will be answered in the presentation. And so there, even though some of the questions that were submitted will be answered, though you can still have the opportunity to ask additional questions at the end. So I'd like to introduce our experts that we have with us today. We have Dennis McLaren. He's our legal counsel from Cascadia Law. He's been with us from the start on this process. We had hired TRC as the technical experts, and most of you might have remembered Karen Greenacre. She retired at the end of 2021, but we do have Gail Hofnagel from TRC with us today. I didn't, and so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dennis, and I'll pull up a presentation unless there's anybody else who wants to say something or has any questions. Yes, Elizabeth.
Would it be okay if I at least just ask that there could be a chat so that if people don't get a chance, I have a little quick explanation that I could say that thank you and how we appreciate from PERK that the city put together this meeting and is recording it, and just to make sure that the citizens that may not have a chance to ask questions, we submitted the questions that you submitted to Cascadia, and thank you for doing that. But we want to make sure that we don't exclude other concerns, and a method by which we might be able to accomplish that before the April 18th public meeting and before the May 2nd deadline for any comments to go to Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. I was wondering if you might employ the chat room so that people could ask questions, or some other method by which PERK, People for Environmentally Responsible Kenmore, and the city could work together to make sure all voices are heard, and that we can help out with the city to get that message out. In case, you know, is it just stinky, or is it unhealthy? There may be other concerns. And even this morning, one of the citizens thinks that it's just steam that comes up out of the facility. So thank you. I can submit this just so that you have our thank you.
Yeah, go ahead and submit that, and I'll ask Bridget, is there a way to turn on the chat feature of the Zoom?
I don't see an option to be able to do that, but I'm looking right now.
Okay. If she figures it out, feel free to chat. And if we don't figure it out, feel free to email us. So that'll work too.
Thank you. Yeah, if anybody needs my phone number, they're welcome to text me at 206-979-3999, and I will then scoot any questions or concerns or emails to you, Brian, to funnel, if that makes sense.
That'll work.
All right.
I'm looking for our technical expert, Gail. There he is. Okay. I didn't see you there. There's so many people.
Okay,
Your audio is a little scratchy, Gail.
doing the best I can.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dennis McLaren from Cascadia and pull up the presentation.
Great, thank you, Brian. And just by way of introduction, as Brian indicated, Gail Hofnagel is now working with us as our technical expert from TRC with Karen Greenacre's retirement. And I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, but first a little bit about me. I am someone who's been working on air and environmental issues for many years. I'm the former EPA regional administrator for Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Idaho. And I'm with Cascadia Law Group and specialize on air and climate issues. So Gail, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, I'm a 50-year consultant, air quality consultant. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in meteorology. I've been the president of the Air and Waste Management Association. Some of you may know that association. And the president of the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering. So I'm here to answer technical questions as they arise.
Okay, next slide, Brian. So what we're going to do, try and get through quickly, is an overview, Cadman's facility permitting history, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency permitting process, and Cadman's draft permit explained, and some process going forward just to make sure everybody's on the same page with respect to that. So plant history, I think most of you know this, but Cadman is a hot mix asphalt plant, although now they operate as a warm mix plant. Technology has changed, and warm mix is now the standard in the asphalt industry. It's processed at lower temperatures than the older hot mixes. It's an old facility. It was initially constructed back in the 60s before modern air laws and regulations, and the prior permits that it has are very old and didn't contain emission limits, testing, or monitoring requirements, so they're quite dated. Cadman did receive a notice of violation, as I think most of you know, for odor issues from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and at that time they also identified that there had been process equipment and control devices installed without first obtaining a notice of construction approval from the Clean Air Agency. So next slide. A little bit about the regulatory framework. When you make modifications to a facility under the laws and regulations, the Clean Air Act and the Washington Clean Air Statute and Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's regulations, if you make modifications, you need to get a permit for that. And so that's the process that we're in now, is Cadman going through the permitting process with the Clean Air Agency, and the Clean Air Agency has reviewed the changes, and in the draft permit is proposing to impose additional operating conditions for the facility, including odor controls. Next slide. So the process, an applicant does apply for a notice of construction permit, and then the Clean Air Agency reviews the application to determine if it's complete. A State Environmental Policy Act checklist is required to be prepared when there's a governmental action like a permit approval. And when the application is complete, and there was quite a bit of back and forth between Cadman and the Clean Air Agency to get to a complete application, what the modeling review would be and what the scope of the permit review would be, a draft permit is then issued for comment. Next slide. The draft permit here was finally issued on March 3rd of this year. As many of you on today requested, a public hearing was requested. The city requested a public hearing, and that has been scheduled for 4 p.m. on April 18th. And written comments on the draft permit can be submitted after the date of the public hearing up until May 2nd, 2022. Next slide. The Clean Air Agency did issue a determination of non-significance under the State Environmental Policy Act, and a DNS means that they concluded that there are no significant adverse environmental impacts created by the actions that they're permitting. And the city will work with TRC and Cascadia to provide both hearing testimony and written comments after the public hearing. We're waiting until after the public hearing to prepare the final written comments, because we want to hear both the testimony from citizens and the testimony from citizens on, excuse me, somebody maybe needs to mute there. We'll wait until we hear what Cadman and the citizens have to say at the public hearing before we prepare final written comments and the city approves those for submission. Next slide. The permit application technically is for the replacement of the drum dryer and a related natural gas burner, and replacement of condensers on the heated asphalt tanks that they have at the 2 heated asphalt tanks that they have on site. Importantly, the Clean Air Agency required Cadman to do stack testing of the dryer for total VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And Gail, do you want to explain what VOCs are very quickly? Oh, you're muted.
Volatile organic compounds are those organic compounds that are emitted and go into the air, thus volatile. They range from methane to benzene. So there's a large amount of VOCs that are possible. The VOCs here are related to what's in the asphalt.
And related to one of the questions coming up, we, as part of the scope of work, we did review the stack testing results, the monitoring results, the modeling results as well. And the Clean Air Agency also required air modeling. There was quite a bit of back and forth between the agency and Cadman over the scope of that modeling and what the data would be that went into the modeling to demonstrate that the facility would not create emissions that would violate federal air quality standards, the air quality standards that are related to public health. And then also the Clean Air Agency required a screening analysis for air toxics. Washington State has an air toxics regulation that regulates the emission levels that are allowed for facilities and has sort of 3 levels of analysis that can be required under that air toxics analysis. First level is a screening analysis, and if you're not above the screening analysis, you're considered as not creating adverse public health impacts from air toxics. And then beyond that, if you exceed any of the screening levels, then you are required to do modeling. And there was one chemical that, one air toxic that was above that, and that was hexavalent chrome. But when they did the modeling for that, it demonstrated that it was about a 40th of the level that is regulated under the Washington air toxics regulations. Next slide.
Since when is modeling an actual readout of the output? We've already been shown that the modeling that the industry uses is inaccurate because they're basing it on not on cutback asphalt, which they do use, but on the performance grade asphalt that has totally different characteristics. And you guys continue to ignore the fact that they've been cited for using cutback asphalt, which does not use the same formulas to model your output figures. So let's just start with, you guys are using modeling in lieu of real testing. So, and the fact that you're modeling something that they don't always use, and we don't know how often they use it, the cutback asphalt, because nobody is down there measuring the tanks and what the use factor is for tanks that we know have cutback asphalt ingredients in them. So that would be something the city could get involved in and has not got involved in.
Let me get through the presentation, please, if we can. But just a quick response to that. One of the conditions on the permit from the Clean Air Agency is that there be limits on what is allowed to be stored in the tanks and used in the process, and that petroleum solvent limit means that those tanks cannot have cutback asphalt levels of petroleum distillates. So
But they've been fined for having cutback. We know there's cutback in the tanks right now, and we have no active on-site monitoring of the cutback tanks. 10,000 gallons worth from last I heard.
So Patrick, let me get through the presentation here. Again, the risk from air toxic pollutants has been evaluated based on the limits that are going to be established in the permit, and based on that, all levels are below the public health-based limits established under Washington's law. And the ambient air modeling also established that the facility meets all federal ambient air quality standards. And again, there's been stack testing, and they'll be testing.
Where's the stack testing? We want it.
So Patrick, please let me finish the presentation here.
Well, if you keep bullshitting everybody, what's the point?
So the facility meets all federal ambient air quality standards and has undergone stack testing and is being required to meet best available control technology limits established for similar facilities. And Gail, could you just quickly talk about what a BACT review, a best available control technology review, is in the context of a permit review?
BACT analysis looks at all the available permits for other facilities, asphalt facilities, both in Washington state and across the country, and make sure that what's applied, the emission limits applied to Cadman, are the best that's available.
So again, modeling analysis was required and did demonstrate that ambient air quality standards are below standards at the fence line, and this modeling analysis was independently reviewed by the Clean Air Agency, and as part of our technical review, TRC has reviewed the modeling and the stack testing results as well. Next slide. So again, the manufacture of cutback asphalt has been a concern for many of the citizens, and I think Dr. Morton and others have continuously raised this as a concern, and it's been addressed in the draft permit by indicating that the two storage tanks at the site that store asphalt product cannot have more than 7% petroleum distillates, and record keeping will be required around that. And with respect to emission testing going forward, Cadman has to conduct initial emission testing within 90 days of the receipt of the permit, and then every 12 months for opacity, and every 3 years for all of the permit limits. And Gail, can you quickly talk about, how the emission testing is done for these types of facilities, the quality assurance plan and the independent requirements from the agency around emission testing?
Yeah, the stack tester is selected by Cadman, and then they prepare a protocol for review by the agency, which must be approved. It must be there 30 days in advance of the stack testing. And the agency has the opportunity to arrive and personally review and watch the stack testing to make sure that it's done according to the protocol that they've approved. And then the agency gets the stack testing report and goes through it in detail and makes sure that it's correct.
And just one clarifying comment, the stack testing is typically done by a consulting firm that is hired by the facility. And again, the test plan is something that the agency sets the parameters on and approves before the testing is completed and accepted. So next slide. A production limit on the facility of 200,000 tons in any 12 consecutive months has been established. That's what the permit application was for. And again, the modeling of the toxic and other emissions from the facility has been based on that peak production limit of 200,000 tons. And stack testing was also done to review actual emissions. And I want to be clear that the stack testing was done with respect to what they've actually been producing at the plant during operation. And in recent years, the plant has produced about 50,000 tons annually. So actual emissions likely have been less than the modeled emissions because the modeled emissions are based on a 200,000 ton production limit. Next slide. Odors, again, a key concern of community members and of the city. And there are extensive odor conditions in the permit, and I recommend that everyone take a look at the odor conditions to determine if they want to make comments on those. But if the Clean Air Agency or a duly authorized representative, which can include the city, detects a nuisance odor beyond the property line, it triggers an odor monitoring program that then must be conducted on a weekly basis. And again, the agreement between the city and the Clean Air Agency makes the city inspector an authorized representative, and we want to confirm that that relationship will continue going forward so that the city will have that ability to monitor nuisance orders and report them and trigger this program going forward. Concern from community members has been impacts beyond the site and out in the community. And so locations that would be required to be monitored if this program is triggered include the Burke-Gilman Trail adjacent to the facility and areas along Northeast Bothell Highway and 181st Street, 182nd Street, 183rd and 184th Streets, and the Kenmore Library parking lot. So again, if the monitoring program is triggered under the conditions, there would be monitoring at sites throughout the community. Next slide.
That's weekly, Dennis. Yes.
Yes.
Monitoring.
Yes, weekly monitoring. And typically that would be done by a consultant that they would hire to do that monitoring if that's triggered. Cadman also is required under the permit to establish a complaint response program, including a complaint phone line and a method of communicating results of investigations and corrective actions taken. And one of the pieces of work that we've been doing on behalf of the city is monitoring through public records requests the communications back and forth from Cadman to the Clean Air Agency. And Cadman has expressed some objections to the Clean Air Agency as they've reviewed the engineering worksheet on the draft permit regarding the odor monitoring and reporting requirements conditioned in the draft permit. So we'll be watching closely what they say and testify at the public hearing. Next slide. Grandfathering has been one of the issues that people have raised throughout this, and with this permit, the facility now must meet the current federal standards of performance for asphalt concrete plants that are contained in the Code of Federal Regulations, and the plant is no longer grandfathered under prior permits, so current day standards will apply. And then on record keeping and reporting, the draft permit contains extensive reporting and record keeping requirements, and one of the reasons for those is that enhances the ability of the agency to take enforcement actions going out into the future. It can monitor test reports and also record keeping. And if those identify violations, that enhances their ability to take enforcement action against the facility and get them back into compliance in the future. Next slide. So what is the process going forward? As I mentioned earlier, there's a public hearing at 4 p.m. on April 18th. Written comments accepted until May 2nd. Final permit issuance could be possible as early as sometime in May. There is a process in Washington State that allows appeals to the Pollution Control Hearings Board after issuance of a final permit, and those can be filed either by the permit applicant or by folks that have been involved in the process previously. And it would be important for folks to make comments to the Clean Air Agency if they're thinking that they might want to appeal the permit sometime in the future. Additional city council briefing, we're going to be throughout this. One of the tasks that we've had is keeping the city council briefed and updated on the progress as the Clean Air Agency has been doing this back and forth and preparing a draft permit for public comment. We do have an additional council briefing coming up that will be held in public session. And then Cascadia and TRC, as I mentioned earlier, will be drafting comments for the city. So Brian, next slide. So Elizabeth provided us with a number of questions from the community. So we put those in the presentation, and we'll go through some of these quickly. And then if we have time, and it looks like we will, we can have some additional questions come forward. But first, what was Cascadia and TRC's scope of work? I've addressed that a bit in the presentation, but the city hired us because of our expertise, both at a technical level from TRC and at a process level, to make sure that we were monitoring what the Clean Air Agency was doing with respect to permitting, that we briefed the council and kept them up to date, that we monitored the communications back and forth between Cadman and the Clean Air Agency, and now that we review the permit and provide comments, as we mentioned before. So that's been our scope of work on this, and we'll continue as this process goes forward. What did Cascadia and TRC review? I mentioned some of that before, but we did review the modeling. We did review the screening analysis, the air toxics analysis. We've reviewed closely the draft permit, and we've been reviewing the back and forth communications on this as this has developed. So, what we've been doing is making sure that everything from the best available control technology review was done in a way that it should be done, and that the modeling and monitoring that's been done to date, the testing that's been done to date has been done to best practices and best technical standards. And Gail, I don't know if you want to say anything to add on top of that, but but that's been part of TRC's role, is to make sure the technical work has been done with best practices.
The emission tests were conducted 2 years ago or so, and as a starting point for all of the emissions inventory information, the modeling was done by EPA methods in the guideline on air quality modeling, and the proposed modeling was reviewed by the agency before Cadman's contractor did the modeling analysis. So, and the modeling was done at the emission limits that are set in the permit. Not what is being emitted now, but the emission limits that are set in the permit.
So next question was, are Cascadia and TRC recommending any changes to the draft permit? We do see some areas that the permit could be improved and tightened. Some things like addressing covering of trucks at the truck loadout area, making sure that we've given that the odor monitoring program is as clear as possible in the draft permit. We have not completed our final set of recommendations because we want to hear the citizen comments in front of in the public hearing, and we want to hear Cadman's response and the agency's presentation in the public hearing, and then we'll be preparing recommendations on final comments for the city. How do the standards required by the draft permit compare to the standards for other asphalt plants? Well, we addressed a little bit of that by talking about best available control technology, but Gail, do you want to take a cut at that?
Yeah, it has the best emission limits that are used in other facilities of this type. So as the best meaning lowest emission limits.
And again, that's part of the back review that's required when they do a notice of construction process. Next slide. Is Cadman required to do something different from other asphalt facilities to protect public and environmental health? Well, as I mentioned before, Washington has an air toxics law that not every state has. So that air toxics review is an important component of determining whether a facility like this would produce air toxics that are dangerous to public health. And so that is above and beyond what is done in some states. That does apply across the board in Washington state, though. I would also say that the odor conditions here are some of the most stringent I have ever seen in an air permit. And that, again, I think is responsive to the community's concerns and the city's concerns about odor impacts on the community. So not only have they addressed the ambient air quality standards that are identified by EPA as protective of public health, they've worked on reviewing the air toxics impacts under Washington's air toxics statute, but they also have imposed these odor conditions that require an extensive odor monitoring program and response program that is above and beyond what you typically see for this type of facility.
Excuse me, but we know that during the burn ban, they
If you have a question, please wait until the end of the presentation and raise your hand. Until then, you'll be continued to be muted.
address the burn ban.
So another question was, did Cascadia or other agencies review the environmental checklist? Yes, we did. And importantly, an environmental checklist is also done in combination in these air permits with the environmental review that's required under the Clean Air Statute. So not everything is covered by the environmental checklist that's covered in the permitting process, and so the agency has done the modeling, the stack testing, and that is in addition to what's contained in the environmental checklist. And then a question about what are the pros and cons of challenging the SEPA determination. Again, the city can't give legal advice and recommends that PERK seek independent advice regarding any appeal of SEPA determinations. But some of the factors in determining whether to legally challenge a SEPA determination are the typical ones that you would have: expense, time, burden of proof, likelihood of success, and so on. And as I said, many of the environmental impacts are scrutinized as part of the permit review here. Next page. How does the permit address public health impacts in Kenmore and for those on the Burke-Gilman Trail? Well, again, the ambient air modeling was done to determine what levels would exist at the fence line of the facility, and that there not be impacts in the community that would exceed ambient air quality standards or air toxic levels that would be exceeding those in the statute. And as you've seen from our description of the odor condition, if that is triggered, they would be required to monitor odors on the Burke-Gilman Trail as well. And anything you want to add to that, Gail?
I think that covers it. There's plenty of protections for the public health in this.
So does condition 20, which precludes storage of cutback asphalt, also prevent the use of cutback asphalt to make hot mixes? So again, we think that storage tank requirement, which monitors and sets limits on the product that can be used in the facility, addresses this. There are other regulations that preclude the use of cutback asphalt, but this permit is designed from the Clean Air Agency to prevent the use of cutback asphalt in the hot mixes at the facility. The next question, is the tax storage tank able to feed its contents into the pug mill mixer? And this one came from Dr. Morton, and what the agency reviewed was the 2 storage tanks where product comes in, and we it would be probably good to make this comment to the agency, Dr. Morton, and determine if they can set a limit on that tax storage tank. We did not look at that because that was not within the scope of the permit, but I think again a comment on that to the agency in the draft permitting process is appropriate. Next page, Flashpoint Test to distinguish cutback asphalt from performance graded asphalt, cements. Surprise testing of 3 on-site tanks. The Clean Air Agency does do unannounced inspections and does have record-keeping requirements here, but again, this is the type of thing that could be made in a comment to the agency on the draft permit itself by citizens or by Dr. Morton. Could PSCAA inspectors use a thermal camera to determine if tanks are kept hot? Yes, they could. That is not something that they typically do. There are devices that are used for thermal imaging that could be used for that purpose. But again, that would be a good comment that could be made on the draft permit by Dr. Morton or by citizens. Could tank delivery records be kept in read-only electronic form? Yes, and again, could be a good comment on this. I think the agency probably would like it to be, both electronic and paper records, but again, a good comment here. Next slide. Will VOC testing under condition 10 be sampling emissions from the pug mill mixer? Where will the probe be? Gail, you've addressed a bit about what the testing plan requirements would be and what the protocols would be, but at this point, the permit itself does not have details as to where the probes would be and that sort of thing, but they would be part of a testing plan. So Gail, you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, the testing would be at the tall stack. It's a rectangular stack that's at the aggregate dryer. And so that would be the normal point for testing all of the emissions from the facility. Because they all go there with one small exception, which is anything that emits from the tanks and which are condensed, where the emissions are condensed, and then anything from the truck loadout. But all the rest of the emissions from the facility go through the aggregate dryer stack. So that would be the point of emission testing.
Will VOC testing be performed while asphalt mix is added to the hot running pug mill mixer? And again, typically testing is required while the plant is in normal operating modes. But Gail, you want to address that?
That would be part of the normal operating mode to be tested. I'm sure that the monitoring plan for the doing the testing would not be accepted by the agency if it wasn't doing asphalt mixing.
And conditions 10, 11, and 12, again, where exactly will quotes for emission testing be located? Should it be specified? And again, you know, typically, yes, and you know, again, that would be a good comment to make, but that is typically addressed, you know, in the testing plan. As Gail indicated, it would make no sense to test other than, you know, at the end of the stack. Next slide. Under condition 22, could VOC testing be required every 18 months rather than every 36 months as provided in the draft permit condition? As we talked about earlier, there are several different types of testing that are required within 90 days after the permit is issued is the first. Then there's annual monitoring of particulates or opacity levels. And then every 36 months under the draft permit for stack testing. But again, a comment could be made on this. I think that 36 months is what the agency has typically required of similar facilities. But you know, again, a comment on this would be appropriate from folks. And then next question was Cascadia TRC tasked with assessing eliminating production at the plant. And that really was not within the scope of our work. Again, our scope was to look at whether the review of the plant under the permit, the modeling parameters, the testing parameters, and those things were being done at highest industry standards, and you know, would provide an accurate indication to the city of you know, what the emissions from the plant would be. But we were not looking at eliminating production at the plant. And then last question that was part of the list that Elizabeth submitted is, do you believe that a health survey is warranted? And I think probably what that was directed at is whether a health impacts assessment would be appropriate here. And you know, there's a formal methodology for health impacts assessments. The only one that I've seen done as part of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's work was for the Highway 520 work that's going on in the Montlake area right now. The legislature required a health impacts assessment for that work. But here, the public health impacts have been addressed with the air modeling, the air monitoring, you know, the air toxics screening analysis, and meeting the state's air toxics standards. So that's a comment that certainly, you know, is within the scope of you know, what people could comment to the agency, but it's not typically something we've seen done for this type of projects, especially where there is other review that's been done, like modeling and air toxics review. And I think that that's the final question that was submitted in the list by Elizabeth. So Brian, I want to take it back to you and Bridget for sort of moderating questions from folks that have their hand raised.
Yeah, we do have a few people that do have their hand raised. If you want to go ahead and unmute your mic when I call you and ask your question, go ahead. Staci Valencia.
Thank you, Bridget. What I wanted to ask is if, well, first, thank you, the city and Cascadia, for having this and including several stakeholders. I also would like to request that all the testing material be available on the city website so that any stakeholder can get to it and find the date, because I am sure that Cadman was told what date that the testing would be going on and that they can use whichever tank that they wanted to. So this is a big concern of ours. Also, I think that it's important to note that all stakeholders, in fact, some of them that are residents that are affected are not part of PERK, but are just individual residents. And so that's another reason why it's so important, or part of Kenmore People for Climate Action as well. Although I thank PERK for asking and requesting this. A lot of us have gone to several meetings in regards to this. And it's very important that everyone and anyone that is affected or part of the drive to try to clean up our ambient air is included. I think the other question is going forward that one of mine is to include 202nd Street and 68. And I do think that if we do not have on the actual permit that you can't use cutback asphalt, it is a huge loophole. And we know what has happened every time there is a huge loophole. And I do think that it's also important that PSCAA and not some of the people, there is a few people, but some of the residents have said some of the other people, and especially in this permit, it says owners and operators would do the nose testing. Those people, some of them do not smell the asphalt odors. And so we need people that actually can smell them, that are not working and not around the asphalt all the time, as well as, you know, people that, you know, care enough and have the passion. And I think it's important that we do have a health assessment, because we do have at least 5 neighborhoods now that the other neighbors are concerned because there's a high cancer rate around their neighborhoods. And this should be tested. And we do know that there are several sites with petroleum, and petroleum is a big part of what the asphalt plant is producing out in our emissions with metals. So thank you very much again, and please make those available on the website. Thank you.
Next up is Miss Vicki Grayland.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'd like to back up Staci Valencia. That was my main point, that the stack testing that Cadman did should be on our website. We need the documentation. Also, I'd like to know, when was that testing done? You know, if they hired somebody, of course they're not going to have the testing done on a day when they're making a load of asphalt. Of course not. And the health impacts assessment, I asked David Baker for a study in last year, actually. So I would like him to please report to the group how that's going. I asked him at a coffee with the council, and he stated that he was on it. So also I'd like to talk about the chat function in Zoom is the default. Turning it on is default. If you have to turn it off. And this is kind of the city's response to the citizens. This is not a city council meeting. This is what I think of an informative meeting, a good exchange, an informal exchange, and the chat function should be on. Thank you.
I can answer the question, one of the questions.
Next up is Mr. David Morton.
I believe that Gail had an answer to Vicky's question.
The sampling was done on October 1st, 2020, and it is appended to the modeling report, which is part of the agency's announcement of the permit. So that is available on the agency's website.
Yeah, one thing I would add to what Gail just said is people should look not just at the draft permit, but at the engineering worksheet that was done as well, which is more extensive discussion of how they arrived at their analysis and the conditions, including things like the best available control technology review. So when you're looking at the agency's website and reviewing what's on there, look not only at the draft permit, but at that engineering worksheet as well.
Right. Yes, and with regard to that engineering worksheet, I believe it does make reference to that October 2020 testing and the dispersion modeling. But thank you, Dennis, for the presentation. I'm very encouraged by especially your remark that condition number 20 should not only prevent the storage of cutback asphalt at the plant, but also prevent its use. Although it doesn't specify use, it would seem to follow that if they're not storing it, they're not using it. But that is kind of a loophole that I think should be filled before the order is issued. And with regard to where the VOC testing is done, I think that because of the design of a batch mix asphalt plant where the asphalt cement is introduced directly into the pug mill mixer.
That's your mom on the phone. I can't answer.
Okay. That the asphalt cement is introduced directly into the pug mill mixer, which comes well after the dryer drum. The dryer drum is at a batch mix plant simply drying the aggregate. Then it gets dumped onto this hot elevator and then dropped down through some sieves into the pug mill mixer, where finally the asphalt cement is introduced. That would be the point right there at the hot pug mill mixer where the majority of VOCs is emitted. So I wonder if Gail or Dennis may be familiar enough with the design of this particular plant. Is there ducting to suck the emissions from the pug mill mixer on into, say, the bag house, or at least at some point, so that VOC emissions from the pug mill mixer do get emitted at the top of the stack?
Yes, that is correct. The
Okay.
VOC emissions from the pug mill mixer and all the other things except the tanks themselves.
Right.
The VOC emissions from everything but the tanks comes out the dryer, the aggregate dryer stack.
Okay. Well, I'm very optimistic then that this order of approval is going to fix the huge stench and the VOC emissions. So I will end my comment and question.
Okay, next I have Mr. Patrick O'Brien.
Hi there. I noticed some discrepancies in that PowerPoint. One would be the Dennis's use of the term hot mix, when we know from all prior evidence that they're using a mid-temperature mix, and that's when it becomes a necessity, not because they like to, a necessity at the mid-temperature to use cutback asphalt. And you did not address that, and you continue to use the hot mix term throughout your presentation. I'm wondering why the city, rather than paving the way for this new permit process, hasn't looked back at the lies, false statements, the obstruction carried out by the asphalt plant, and the clear collusion between Puget Sound Clean Air, Kenmore, and PCC. It seems like, oh, we just missed it by an hour, we missed it by a day. That's indicative of the fact of when the city of Kenmore opens up, their staff is available, and when they do the majority of the startup and operation of that plant is well before we have people in Kenmore to go and respond to that in a health, and this is about the health. I don't care if you have a skunk across the street. I care about the health effects of those solvents in the air I'm breathing. So when we keep talking about smell, it's proven, and I will rely on any expert testimony from David Morton, that a lot of the chemicals you're using are to mask the smell, and you might not smell anything and yet have very dangerous levels of chemicals being put into the air. And then once again, Dennis, you missed the whole point on their operation during burn bans. They say they've been above board and reporting, and they're the nice guys in the neighborhood, yet they operate when the Puget Sound Clean Air Monitors is in the purple on air pollutants. They produce asphalt with nary a care of enforcement. And why you were hired and not pursuing a criminal interest in this against the asphalt plant, that is the total question mark I have. If you, sir, have the legal background I believe you to have, and they have egregiously broken the rules, they should not be under consideration for any new permit. As a matter of fact, they should be prosecuted, criminally prosecuted for what they've done in the past, and we have record of. Thank you for your presentation today.
I do not see anyone else. I just have Peter. Go ahead.
I just have one simple question. Is there any reason the city can't employ a city inspector who lives in the affected area, train somebody to identify these odors, and be a 24-hour-a-day monitor for this problem, for the odors?
I guess I'll attempt to answer that. The plant doesn't run 24 hours a day. So we'd probably want to have somebody that would be available when the plant would operate. And unfortunately, the city, we don't have the resources to hire somebody on a 24-hour basis. And I would have to wonder if that would be enough. You know, I mean, we have someone on staff who's trained to respond to these odor complaints during business operations. And so, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I guess what I'm asking, is this a difficult job to train somebody to do, to identify these VOCs and toxic odors, to be the nose on the ground? And I'm thinking more of a casual citizen employed at very low cost to be the eyes and ears for the city inspector for this problem. And I guess, is it reasonable to think you could just maybe hire a local resident for almost nothing to just when they're there, to respond when they see something and be trained to identify?
Yeah, the testing that we received to follow up on the odor complaints, that doesn't really get into the details of the VOCs and other types of toxins. It's really just about the odor. And so the odor responses that we have, those are pretty simple to be tested, or excuse me, to be trained on. somebody from the agency will come out, and it's basically a 0 to 4 type of level where there's 0, there's no odor that's detected by the inspector, up to 4 where they can't stand it and they have to get out of the area immediately. But that's, you know, that's really just the odor itself. And I wouldn't understand how to get involved with the testing of VOCs and other health concerns. So that would be above and beyond what somebody on our staff could do.
Individual citizens have the right to complain or file a complaint, which must be acted on by Cadman. Make sure that that provision of the draft permit gets included in the final.
On one of the early slides, there was a comment about having a city inspector come up and investigate odor complaints. And it seems that's been a chronic weakness of this problem. The city inspector can't get there in time or is unavailable when there's a complaint. The odor's come and gone. And that's why I was just wondering about training a local citizen who lives there to be your city inspector to initiate then further follow-up.
So just a comment from me on that. I think that you know, what the odor condition is intended to do is enhance the ability of the agency to do enforcement action around odors. And so, you know, what they often are concerned about is the ability to prevail in an enforcement appeal in front of the Pollution Control Hearings Board. So there's a certain, you know, standard of training and evidence that is required to support a complaint. What they're trying to do with this condition, and that's why I think everyone should scrutinize that odor condition carefully, is create an opportunity for better records, better follow-up, and better enforcement going forward. And you know, certainly citizens could be, you know, receive the odor training that the air agency you know, provides. Bridget, you know, Baker has had that training herself. And that could enhance the complaint, you know, process as well.
Let's see. I think Elizabeth was next.
Thank you. I just really appreciate all this. I think one of what Peter's talking about and everybody here is concerned about is not, it has to do with, are these emissions dangerous? And are these causing people who are most impacted by it in certain areas when the wind is blowing a certain way? Are they getting cancer? Are they having pneumonia? Are they having asthma attacks? That is what has been ignored because of this process of having to call an inspector. And the odor is now being suppressed, and they're legally allowed to, Cadman's allowed to, since October. Now I think it's a year ago, a year and a half ago. So what our city and our citizens could collaborate on with Cascadia and TRC is what I think was brought up as a health survey. And Vicki Grayland did talk to David Baker. Dr. Robin Evans Agnew put together a symptom survey that citizens could walk around. But could the city at least educate most of the community that even today, the gentleman that lives right above those emissions that Janet Hayes is showing behind her, he thinks it's just steam, and that is dangerous. If many of our citizens and businesses think that there is somebody overlooking and taking care of all of us, and they are unaware that those have been grandfathered in for so long, then we are with blinders on for most of our community. And it's not anybody's fault but our own for not speaking up enough. So I'm asking specifically that we use our city to get that health survey going in whatever format we can.
Okay, I have Mr. John Culver.
Yeah, I came in late, so I missed some of this. The slide deck and the video for this meeting, are those going to be posted?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Bridget.
Yes, we're working on getting those posted and available for the public.
Thank you.
Was that your only question, or did you have further?
That's it for now. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have is Janet Hayes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I live less than 800 feet from the stack. I have suffered cancer. I have Barrett's esophagus, which my doctor has said that is likely being caused by what I'm breathing. And I have not used my deck. We have not as a family. My mom, who also lives in this building, have not used their deck since 2004, because that's when we realized how bad it was. That's when we moved in. So I am wondering if any, Dennis or Gail, I'm not sure I understood who Gail was representing, but have you both been physically to this plant and taken a look at it to see what you're talking about?
So I can address that. Gail has not. He's in Connecticut, but I have been there many times and am a cyclist myself, and have cycled by the plant many times. Stopped, taken a good look as this process has gone on. So yes, I'm quite familiar with the location and the operation and the facility itself.
All right, I have one more question. With this new permit, if it's accepted, will it allow the asphalt plant to upgrade its equipment to be current? The equipment that it is using came from an old asphalt plant called Metro Asphalt in Everett in the 1960s. Late 1960s was when they started this process. So I do have that paperwork, and I'd like to know if they would have to get a permit for that, what that would require from Cadman if they were going to replace any equipment. And I also wondered if the 18 months, we really have not had any extensive testing, and we have been breathing it and complaining about it since I moved to Kenmore. And I received documents from 2000 forward that Fred Stouter, the last city manager, was able to get from Puget Sound Clean Air. So nothing was ever tested. It was always a formula that was used by the product, how much sand and gravel, that I need to know more about. And there's another emission that concerns me with that asphalt plant. They do operate with natural gas. And one of the things that we smell continually that make it very bad, stinky, and more nauseous is the natural gas emission. And I wondered if there's any way to control or test the emissions. I held my phone up as they were doing work, so you could see the two stacks. One is an emission. They don't have a stack for it. It just comes out. And that would be something I'm concerned about. I think that's all for right now. I'm still writing my comment.
So thanks for that. With respect to the standards that the plant will be required to meet going forward, they now no longer are grandfathered. And so if they do change equipment, it does trigger new permitting requirements, and they would be required to meet current regulations, both the EPA regulations as well as the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's Regulation 1 requirements. So that aspect is now improved as a result of this permit. And then the testing that is going to be done going forward, and what we described in terms of an air toxics review and an air modeling with respect to ambient air quality standards that are based on public health is also important in that regard.
And one more question, sorry, and I'm done then. Will the new permit, if accepted, allow the asphalt plant to increase its production at this site? And will the public be informed?
So again, the permit sets a limit of production of 200,000 tons a year, and that is what all of the analysis was based on. Their historic production recently, we don't know what they produced years ago, but recently has been around 50,000 tons annually. And I think, again, there wouldn't be any public notification up to that 200,000 ton limit, but if it went beyond what the permit limits are and what was modeled and tested, then that would require a new permit.
Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other people with questions. I want to remind everybody that this is recorded, and we will put this on our website, and it will be on YouTube as well. And keep in mind, this is not the public hearing. This was just the interaction with our experts, and that if you do have additional comments, please get those to the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency before the deadline. And the public hearing is on April 18th at 4 p.m. So that's a separate meeting altogether. Let's see, I think that's it. Well, now I see a couple hands raised.
Yeah, I would request that in past Zoom meetings, you could make sidebar comments in response to the people who are doing the presenting, and those comments are real time, and anybody participating in the meeting has the ability to write a factual comment, snide comment, polite comment, whatever. And I think this forum would benefit from the ability of all the participants to be able to make comments in process. And I apologize for my outburst, but a lot of times they're going over terms and whatnot, and there's no reasonable way to address that at the moment, and those terms perpetuate themselves throughout the entire talk. And so if there was a sidebar messaging so you could make your point, it's on the record, I think that would be a great aid in communication. Thank you.
Yeah, noted. And if you go back and you watch this video and you have any questions regarding any of the terms that were brought up, feel free to email us. We'll try to get those answered for you. Yes, Elizabeth.
Thank you for that, Brian. That was one thing I was just wanting to keep the ability for folks to spread the word, to ask questions in the rest of the community. And is there any chance that people would be able to attend the City Hall in person to be a part of the Zoom call hearing on April 18th? I was just thinking that might build some connections between us all. It would be right there in the community. You know, we can see the asphalt facility. And I thought maybe with COVID restrictions coming down a bit, and if April 18th at 4 p.m. is something that we could have the city welcome us back, masked or whatever. I'm just putting it out there as a possible way to congeal in a good way.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that we were working on some technical situations at the council chambers to be able to have some type of a hybrid meeting, but I don't think it's ready, and I don't know if it'll be ready by April 18th. I could look into it and let you know if that's a possibility, but I don't know right now.
Okay, are we allowed to have meetings there in person now? Like, would PERK be able to have a meeting there and we all have our laptops at 4 p.m.?
Yes, we have opened up the community room again for rentals. So go ahead and get a hold of the receptionist up front if you want to make a reservation.
Okay, great. And if we wanted to try to get a health survey, is that separate from what Dennis and the group can handle, or is that something we take up with staff or council?
Well, Dennis, do you know the answer to that? What would it take to do a health survey?
Yeah, that wasn't within the scope of what we've looked at, and again, I need a little bit more information about what Elizabeth has in mind, and I just haven't been involved in that communication chain, so it's hard for me to comment.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.